Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Mykela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Write with Mykela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. I'm hoping to continue to get chapters from you, so don't leave us hanging. If you've have already sent, say, chapters 1 through 14, I'm going to release 2 videos on some Tuesdays to read your writing prompts and 2 videos on some Fridays to read your chapters for those of you where I have permission to read your work on the channel. So basically your work will be extra videos, but everything else will be the same for my viewers. And I will label your videos in a manner that is intuitive to my viewers as well. If you are writing with me and wish to exchange chapters, then I need written permission to read your chapter on the channel. As I have discussed before, writers may send their chapters in PDF or Word document format to WritewithMykela@gmail.com. Write is spelled like the activity, W-R-I-T-E, and Mykela is spelled M-Y-K-E-L-A. Please do not send Google Docs. I'm not making any promises to read every chapter sent to me on the channel, but I intend to read all the chapters sent. All chapters read on Fridays, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. I want to remind everyone that this story is at least PG-13, meaning if you are under 13 years old, you need parental guidance. This story is in its rough draft stage, as we have already heard many mistakes in the book. The title of the story is City of the Ancients, and today we are reading chapter 15, Turmoil in Ultrarium. Let's start. After 3 days of travel, they once again stopped the wagon and got out and made camp like they had every night. The days had been long and hot, so they didn't really want or need a fire. They still had plenty to eat from the last castle they had visited. Although Mr. Valens wasn't too keen on eating the dried foods, he didn't complain. Since Mr. Valens slept in the wagon as they rode, he usually volunteered to stay up and keep watch. So as usual, the 3 siblings lay down on their blanket and went to sleep. Late in the night, Kirsha jerked awake and rolled up to a stand. She looked around their camp in the dim moonlight. She didn't see or hear anything. Mr. Valens looked like he was asleep sitting up. She thought to herself, why did they need him? Kirian raised up on one elbow and thought to her if everything was okay. Kirsha thought in return that she didn't know. She thought maybe it had been a dream, but she wasn't sure. Kirsha then thought to herself that she could look in her orb as to what was around them, but she didn't want Mr. Valens to know about her orb. So she just thought to Kirian that she would be back. Kirian expected her to walk out of camp and water the grass. But suddenly she was gone, like the wind came and scooped her up. Kirian's heart skipped a beat. So he looked around the camp to make sure everything was in order. Kirsha stood beside their raft they had used before. Then she remembered barely getting in the castle before the dissenters arrived. She thought to herself that the dissenters didn't even try to get in the castle as far as she knew. Her grandfather had told her that the castle had a lot of magic. So maybe the dissenters didn't even know it was there. Then she thought, but the people in the villages know about the castles, so the dissenters must know. Kirsha concluded that the people and dissenters knew of the existence of the castle, but might not know exact location. They might just know general direction. She didn't know how she knew where the first castle was, but then she remembered the map room. She had placed the tiny little houses down on the map, and that stuck in her mind. She then knew where the castles were. Kirsche looked down at the raft and decided they needed it to enter the next castle. So she shrank it like she did the staff, and she picked it up. The raft was now a very extra small raft, so she could put it in her pocket. Before Kirsche headed back to camp, she heard a voice. "Kirsche, I have no place to ask for your ear, but I feel I must." Kirsche got out her orb and looked inside. Kirian was sitting up in their camp, and Mr. Valens was still asleep. Then, for the first time, she saw in her mother's and father's orbs. She didn't know it, but she saw into the room and realized that there were orbs on small pillows. Then she looked for the sphere. "I don't see you." "We covered the sphere at night to allow you privacy. I'm touching the sphere through the cloth," replied the voice. "It seems to have worked." "Oh, well, what did you want to tell me?" asked Kirsche. "I've been working on a hypothesis, and I don't think the dissenters want to kill you. I think they want to scare you, yes, but also they want to enter the city with you. That's not to say you shouldn't send Kilty in, but you should restore Ultrarium so we can help you fight." The conversation went back and forth for several minutes as the voice told her some of the history and how they did build something similar to the Ultrarium for the dissenters, sort of like a prison, and that they had imprisoned as many as they thought there were at the time. But obviously they had missed some. Heatherland, the voice, said she felt they escaped, and so it was more important now than ever for the siblings to restore the Ultrarium. Heatherland then again apologized for disturbing Kirsche and asked Kirsche to consider her hypothesis. Kirsche then returned to camp. Her and Kirian snuggled together, but Kirsche didn't go to sleep for a long time. Heatherland hadn't given her a number of dissenters, but Kirsche knew she didn't want to fight the 15 to 20 that had chased them before. Fighting Dante and then fighting the dissenter Belboobsy afterwards wasn't something she wanted to repeat. She wasn't even sure if Belboobsy had been among the 15 to 20 dissenters chasing her, Kirian and Kilty. Belboobsy could have stayed in her village all these years, and that would make sense as to why he chose to stay this time as well. Kirian knew something bothered Kirsche, but he faded off to sleep and knew Kirsche would tell or think to him about whatever it was when she was ready. Around midday of the next day of traveling, they turned southeast. When the woods no longer went south but turned east, they would travel southeast until they found the next southern point of woods, or the ocean. Then they would head straight east. A day and a half after they turned southeast, they came to the ocean and turned straight east. They decided to try to catch some fish while they had the opportunity. Mr. Valens didn't comment on their direction, and the only hurry they had was for Kilty's cure. Thankfully, some of the herbs Kirsche had gathered from Dr. Morson's office were just what they needed to replenish Kilty's herbs. Kirian and Kirsche used a net to catch a few fish. Kirian commented that he hadn't known why he had taken the net from the castle, but now he was glad. Mr. Valens perked up some at the mention of the castle, but he didn't say anything. Kirsche felt like a sleeper thought from a dissenter inhabited Mr. Valens, and he would one day suddenly attack them. She also thought of Bonnie, and decided to check on her while Kirian and Kilty cooked the fish. Bonnie thought to her what her husband had decided to do, and they were going around to people, but it had been slow. One, they didn't want to jump to conclusions because of fear, but they also wanted to know. Without sharing what they thought, they would ask the person who had just read if they had noticed anything. Doing it that way, several people mentioned Mr. Lister, without knowing anyone else had noticed differences in him. Bonnie then asked what they should do if they confirmed the sleeper thoughts. Kirsha didn't know, so she turned her back to Mr. Valens and took out her orb. Before she spoke to anyone, she did locate Mr. Valens in her orb, and she told herself to watch him. She got several answers or hypotheses about the sleeper thoughts and how to handle someone whom they suspected that the sleeper thoughts infiltrated. Kirsha wasn't sure that answered her question enough, so before she contacted Bonnie again, she thought what the sleeper thought would want to know. When she contacted Bonnie again, she first asked if Bonnie knew why they had left, and Bonnie said they were going to spread the news to her village. Kirsha then told Bonnie that she suspected that the sleeper thoughts wanted to know when they returned to the village, so the villagers should not say anything around Mr. Lister about where they were. Bonnie wasn't so sure because everyone knew they had left, so she asked a lot of questions, and some questions over and over. Kirsha tried to reassure her, but she wasn't totally sure herself. She did tell Bonnie that Mr. Lister might miss some memories when the sleeper thoughts were gone. Kirsha really wanted to use Xantrix on Mr. Lister while he had the sleeper thoughts, if he had them. She put her orb away and turned back to watch Kirian, Kilty, and Mr. Valens. Then suddenly, she heard math questions in her mind and the answers. She thought that was strange. But then she realized that Kilty was practicing on her own. They hadn't done any schooling at least since they left Castle West Polk. Kirsha hadn't worried about it because Kilty had been reading her magic book and learning, and they had all read from the book City of the Ancients. So Kirsha knew Kilty was gaining knowledge. Then Kirsha got an idea. She had wanted to try thinking with Kilty, but her and Kirian thought together to leave Mr. Valens out. Now, she listened to the thoughts in her mind, and she decided to think a math problem to Kilty. She remembered before when Kirian and Kilty worked a math problem in the dirt. So she thought to Kilty, 200 divided by 2. As soon as Kirsha thought the problem to Kilty, then Kilty looked up and looked straight at her. Kilty said aloud, "I don't remember." Kirsha put a finger to her lip. Shh. She smiled and raised her eyebrows a couple of times, then slightly pointed her head and her eyes towards Mr. Valens. Kilty thought, "That's why you've been so quiet lately. I mean, it's been extra quiet." Kirsha realized that Kilty was thinking with her. She thought, "Answer the question." And yes, Kirian and I have been using telepathy, so not to say anything in front of Mr. Valens. He had a sleeper thought at one time, and that took away some memories. But we don't know if there is another sleeper thought there. "Is that why you use Xantrix? What are Xantrix?" thought Kilty. Answer the question first, teased Kirsha. Kilty answered the question, and Kirsha thought to her what she knew of Xantrix and shared some of the pictures she had seen in Kirian's mind. Afterwards, they ate fish, which Mr. Valens really seemed to enjoy. Amy ran through the ultrarium, yelling for someone to help or to send Commander Rivas. She came to the sphere, which someone had already covered for the night. She glanced over her shoulder, and there didn't seem to be anyone there at the moment, so she reached out and touched the sphere. "Kirsha! Oh, Kirsha, my queen, please answer me," said Amy. "I need help." Kirsha rolled away from Kirian and sat up. She looked around the camp and saw that Mr. Valens was on his side, curled in a ball. Kirsha pulled out her orb and answered. I'm here, but I'm not queen, replied Kirsche. We haven't time to argue that, replied Amy. My husband killed a dissenter before coming here, and he thought he used a spear as the last blow. But the dissenter is trying to come out here in the ultrarium. My husband didn't know until just now, and he is trying to keep the dissenter within. What should we do? What should I do? Several people were gathering and listening to Amy, and someone called Commander Rivas. Several started saying their hypothesis. One hypothesis was to kill Amy's husband before the dissenter could fully emerge, to which Kirsche immediately disagreed. Look, fighting a dissenter is hard, stated Kirsche. They are vicious. If the last blow is magical, then it had to be. End of discussion on that. The people around the spear fell silent, and Orisha, Arik, and Commander Rivas joined the circle. I'm removing the sphere cover, stated Orisha. That way you can see us. Kirsche was temporarily confused with the change of topic. But as she looked in her orb, she saw the cover lift, and she saw all the people. I've sent some guards to the home to help, stated Commander Rivas. Once Commander Rivas spoke, something clicked for Kirsche. Oh, you're the one who thought Far's someone or other was trying to use you. Oh, this makes sense. Whoever is in the husband is lesser among the dissenters. He tries and sends thoughts to the rest. Okay, you people love hypothesis, so here is mine. If they can send out thought essences or life essences that contain thoughts, then there is a way to pull that life essences out. I think we fight them after we pull that out. Then the final blow is to kill the essence or the essences if there are more than one. And I think fire will work. Several people were writing things down, but at first no one said anything. Then several had questions and they slightly raised their hand to speak. Arik saw them, so he said, Do you know how to pull the life essence out? Not yet, replied Kirsche. I'm working on it. I think I will have to try non-intellectual things first, like maybe the life out of a fire or something. The dried food gave me the idea, although the food isn't dead, it's in a state of something. The liquid is pulled out of the food, dear, stated Orisha. It usually preserves the food. It doesn't kill it. Arik put his hand on Orisha's shoulder. She is working on her hypothesis, but we still have an issue with Amy's husband. Not with the husband, stated Kirsche sternly. The dissenters have done this. We cannot blame our people. Then several more people ran up to the crowd and exclaimed a dissenter was trying to return through their loved one. So the crowd dispersed and the people got ready to fight whichever dissenters were successful at coming back. Commander Rivas didn't feel Farshnail trying to return at the moment, and he thought about Kirsche's revelation. Farshnail would learn from the others. The thing was that he didn't know if he or anyone else could see the thought essence a dissenter sent out. Kirsche watched in her orb for a while. She saw the ultrarium turn to chaos. But the ancients didn't kill ancients, and they held off fighting dissenters until dissenters had fully emerged. And the dissenters emerged with their own bodies and weren't using the body of the host. Kirsche was glad that hypothesis was wrong. Kirsche watched the fights. She hoped to learn or become aware of some skills to fight. As she watched the ancients battle the dissenters and kill them without magic, she had to wonder if the hypothesis had any truth. Many of the dissenters they were fighting didn't seem to be as skilled or have as much magic as Belboobsy, and the dissenters after her left Belboobsy behind. Kirsha pulled the orb closer to her face, and she stared inside. She reached back and touched Kirian. I need you to look in your orb and see if you're seeing life essences from the descenders going into the ancients. Kirian sat up and rubbed his eyes. He blinked his eyes a couple of times and then pulled out his orb after he glanced over at Mr. Valens. He stared inside and said, "What's going on? It looks like a war is going on." "I'll explain in a bit," replied Kirsha. "Do you see anything, like something from dead bodies of dissenters going into the body of the ancients, of an ancient?" Kirian looked and looked, but he didn't see what Kirsha was asking him to see. Finally he said, "No, I don't see anything like that." "Then that's the first problem," stated Kirsha. Then she explained what she could to Kirian. After a few minutes, Kilty came over and listened too. Kirsha told them the hypotheses that she knew and why she thought some of them were wrong. She asked them if they remembered her fight with Belbudsi. Kilty, of course, didn't, because Kirian made her get down below the rim of the wagon. Kirian remembered the fire thrown at thin air, but he hadn't seen what Kirsha had thrown the fire at. Kirsha needed to figure things out before they met any more dissenters. She had a few ideas from watching the ancients fight, but it wasn't enough, mostly because in the ultrararium there were many more ancients than there were dissenters. In the morning, Kirsha wanted to check on the ultrararium and the ancients, but she didn't want to do so in front of Mr. Valens. She thought maybe once they were in the wagon, he wouldn't pay much attention. Of course, she didn't want to speak out loud. Kirsha hoped that the life essences from the dissenters that she saw go into the ancients didn't reemerge during the night. They hadn't fully unpacked the wagon when they stopped, so they just had to roll up their blankets and hitch the horse to the wagon. They ate breakfast and got ready to go. After they rode for an hour or so, Kirsha pulled out her orb. Kilty immediately glanced back at Mr. Valens. Then she motioned to Kirsha if she could hold the orb. Excuse me. Kirsha thought to her that she had to check on the ancients, but maybe Kilty could hold the orb in the castle. Kilty wanted to know if Kirsha could use the orb to check on their village. And Kirsha had told her she didn't think so, but she might try later. Kilty then wanted to know more about the telepathy and how it worked, so Kirsha promised to explain what she could after she checked on the ultrararium. Kilty was satisfied. Kirsha looked in her mother's and father's orb. Darkness seemed to surround her father's orb, but her mother's orbs still seemed to be on the pillow, and no one seemed nearby. Kirsha remembered that her parents sometimes carried their orbs in their pockets, so she tried the telepathy with her father. Soon her father was pulling his orb out of his pocket, and Kirsha could see him and around him. Arik started to speak, but Kirsha quickly thought to him not to. Then she thought to him about Mr. Valens. They thought back and forth for several minutes. Kirsha thought her concern was Mr. Valens had another sleeper thought, and maybe they should leave Mr. Valens outside when they went into the castle. Arik didn't think that was necessary. He asked Kirsha if the pictures were asking a question as she went through using Xantrix. Kirsha didn't remember a question. Her father encouraged her to try Xantrix again, and instead of looking at pictures, to ask the mind if it had any questions. Kirsha wondered why no one had thought that to her. Arik admitted that it was his own hypothesis. He then related his story about meeting his younger sister. He still didn't know they were siblings, but he had just learned Xantrix, and the young girl allowed him to use Xantrix on her. When the Wise-Seer introduced him, Arisha and Alimra, as siblings, Alimra's whole being convulsed, and even though they were just introduced as siblings, Alimra didn't even remember that much. Arik told Kirsha that the sleeper thoughts took away a lot of memories, so much so that Elimra needed special care to this day. Arik then told Kirsha the question he found in Elimra's mind was, who are the siblings? There was silence between them for several minutes. Arik then continued. He thought to her that there was a debate about him and their mother turning Elimra over to the Ulcerarium while they left the next set of siblings behind. But he had been sure that there were no more sleeper thoughts, so they kept their sister with them. The two of them had to make their own orbs, and they worked to make their sister's orb for her. Kirsha had questions on that, and Arik answered he and his siblings weren't strong enough for the orbs left behind. He told Kirsha that she and her siblings had the power to call and hold the orbs, and they had the power to restore the Ulcerarium. He told her that he believed the instructions were within the text, City of the Ancients, and he hoped she, Kirian, and Kilty could restore the City of the Ancients. Arik continued, we were wrong to hide ourselves away. Yes, we need to be careful with our knowledge and our research, but we cannot hide any longer. They finished their conversation, and Kirsha shrank the orb and replaced it in the staff. Kilty gazed at Kirsha. She wanted information, but Kirsha seemed downcast, so she wasn't sure what to do. Finally, she slowly opened her book and started reading. Okay, writers, that's the end of chapter 15. A lot started happening in the City of the Ancients, or the Ulcerarium. Remember how I told you about interrelated events? Things have to come together. Well, so far, the Ulcerarium has just been a place of knowledge, and that is an interrelated piece. But now, Kirsha got to view a fight or a battle, and that will be important for her. Now, on a prior Tuesday, we talked about symbolism with metaphors and similes. So I pulled out of our story today, she was gone like the wind came and scooped her up. I pulled this out to help you see that Tuesdays are important. We use a lot of what I talk about on Tuesdays when we are writing. On that note, leave a comment below on which jargon or writing prompt you've liked the best so far. Also, comment on which ones you've noticed in your writings. A lot of times we use these things and we don't really notice them until we go back and we read it. And sometimes I go back and read it and I won't notice it until I'm preparing for a video and it's like, oh yeah, that was there. So we use these things all the time. We just don't necessarily put a definition to it. And that's why I don't really want us concerned with the definition and the label or whatever. I just want us to know these things are available. When your book gets published and an English professor is discussing it in his English class, then you can take his class and see, oh yeah. So that'll be fun stuff. But these things are just to kind of make you aware. The Tuesdays are to make you aware, but the information there is important so that you know that you have options when you get stuck or you don't know fully how to explain a scene. Then you can use some of the material from Tuesdays to help you explain or describe a scene, or how you want to fill out your scenes. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and the bell so we can continue to write together. Send your chapter 15 as a PDF or Word document to WritewithMykela@gmail.com. Or if you haven't sent any chapters, then send your chapter 1. You don't have to polish it or perfect it. This is just fun stuff. Visit my website, read about the characters in Mykela, Operatives, and City of the Ancient. My website is www.bymykela.com. That's www.bymykela.com. Leave a comment on how many bios you've read so far, or let me know your favorite characters so far. I will tell you that not all the characters are main characters. I have I have bios for minor characters as well. One character that many people love is Differ. He is a dragon. So you have to go read his bio and see who Differ is. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, please share it with them. This is Mykela with Write with Mykela. Bye for now.